Hello, I'm Myron Smith, and I'll be hosting this edition of Community Forum with Andrew Flowers, candidate for state representative. Hello, Andrew. How are you today?
Doing great. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Have some questions for you today. Where were you born, and where did you grow up?
I moved more than 20 times across 5 states before I even graduated high school. I didn't go to the same school for 2 years in a row until 11th grade. So when people ask me, where are you from? I often say I'm from everywhere. And there's some truth to that. So to answer your question, I was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. But before I even went to kindergarten, I lived in Missouri, Tennessee, Georgia. Eventually, I ended up in Virginia. That's where I graduated high school. Now, my family, we were a working class family that struggled. I was the oldest of 5 kids. Yes, my dad was in the military. That's part of the reason I moved so much. But he left the Army before I even went into kindergarten. So a lot of our struggles in terms of near evictions or near foreclosures were because we financially had a lot of difficult times. I was the oldest of 5 kids, and I saw my parents go bankrupt twice. In high school, for instance, as a teenager, I worked in my dad's janitorial business. I'd get up before dawn, and with him, we would clean retail stores and office buildings before I'd head to class. So our family went through a lot. I saw my dad in another job before high school. He got injured working at a rubber factory, a rubber plant, and he got fired. And I had to watch him sue the company for workers' compensation. So my story in terms of how I moved around so much, it's partly as an Army brat, but it's mostly because, like so many families in our community right here in Massachusetts, but throughout the country, we struggled. So that's my lived experience. And I'm now living in my 9th state, Massachusetts. But my wife, who's from here, she's from Halifax, from the South Shore. We wanted to put down roots. We have 2 kids, 4-year-old Vivian and 2-year-old Luke. So we wanted to come home, so to speak, to her home. And now Massachusetts is more of a home to me than I've ever known. I love it here, and I want to raise my family here, and I've been invested in the town of Walpole, where we live. So Massachusetts is now home to me.
What is your educational background and professional experience, and how is that relevant to your campaign?
So while my family struggled, I did get lucky in one respect. I went to a good public high school in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and that public education helped me go to the University of Chicago, where I studied economics. And when I graduated, I took a job not on Wall Street or in a consulting firm. No, I wanted to work in economic policy to help people's lives be better. So I worked at the Federal Reserve. I thought, hey, this is kind of an important institution in terms of helping the economy stay afloat. Well, guess when I started? I started in 2008. And for 5.5 years, I worked at the Fed during the financial crisis. And I saw firsthand market failure after market failure in housing or in finance. And millions of people lost their homes. Millions of jobs were lost, but millions were made on Wall Street with mortgage-backed securities and other financial instruments that essentially brought the world economy to its knees. So I saw that with a front row seat. That was my time at the Federal Reserve Bank. But then I moved on to journalism for 3 years. I worked at 538.com, which is Nate Silver's data-driven news website. And that was a great learning experience where I got to listen and learn and talk to people all over the world about their jobs, about the social safety net that was often inadequate for them in terms of housing or early childhood education. These are the stories I wrote. So that was my time at 538. But then more recently, I was an economist with Indeed.com, and that's the world's largest job site. I was a researcher and spokesperson for the company on healthcare, tech, retail jobs. I've been quoted in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, or NPR, you name it. And really my goal at Indeed was to help people get jobs, hopefully good jobs, jobs my parents would have dreamed of. And it was a great company, and I wouldn't want to leave it until this opportunity arose. And my professional experience, the through line really, is my lived life in a family that struggled, combined with my economic expertise, is what I think prepares me to help fight for this district, for the 8th Norfolk District, for the towns of Walpole and Sharon and Stoughton and Mansfield, to fight for the people here, because I've been through a lot of difficult life experiences, but I also have the economic tools, the experience to move the ball forward and make lives better for people in our community.
What is your experience in state and local government?
I'm the vice chair of the Finance Committee in Walpole. I'm the chair of the Affordable Housing Committee in Walpole. What actually got me involved in local government, and I've been deeply involved for the last 4 years, was early childhood education. When I had my daughter, who's 4.5, I noticed, as other young families told me, that you had to write a check for public education, for full-day kindergarten. You had to write a nearly $4,000 check to send your kid to kindergarten for the whole day. And that, to me, I scratched my head. I thought that was crazy, because you had some of the biggest inequalities in education are rising before kids even get into kindergarten. And then those families that struggle, they're faced with the choice of writing that $4,000 check to send their 5-year-old to school for the whole day, where they really need it. I mean, the state standards for kindergarten are really stringent. So that's what got me involved in local government. I've since risen to be the vice chair of the Finance Committee. I'm deeply enmeshed in municipal finances, whether it's pension systems or property tax exemptions. I'm enmeshed in police and fire and school budgets in Walpole, but that extends to any city or town. That experience of being a very data-driven, do your homework member of the Finance Committee has really educated me a lot over the last 3 years. And then separately, I mentioned I'm the chair of the Affordable Housing Committee. And again, this is personal to me. I grew up in a family that faced a lot of near evictions and foreclosures. And a friend in town, a man by the name of Patrick in Walpole, he's a veteran, and he is homeless. And the church that my wife works at, my wife's a minister, helped fundraise to buy an RV for Patrick. And so he lived in our driveway for 4 months. And so affordable housing is very personal to me. And so what I've done in terms of the local government level is push for zoning changes that empower our communities to prevent unwanted 40B developments while still providing housing choices, housing options for seniors or veterans, or in the worst case scenario for homeless people like Patrick. So that has been a really fruitful experience, learning about the housing market and about zoning, and how in Walpole, but really so many towns in the Boston metro area, zoning is failing us, and it's not working for our housing market, and for seniors in particular who don't have options if they want to downsize. If they're feeling the burden of property taxes, there just aren't options for them. And so that's been a passion of mine, is affordable housing. So over the last 3 to 4 years, I've been very involved in the local town of Walpole on the Finance Committee and with the Affordable Housing Committee.
Okay. What do you hope to achieve by running for state representative?
I think we need a fresh infusion of new leadership on Beacon Hill. What I'm frustrated with is, in Massachusetts, we have major challenges to face. We have a transportation system that's failing us. We have inequality that's getting worse. And we have the perils of climate change that need to be addressed. We have these major challenges. And the State House is not matching the urgency of the time. And as one report put it last year, our politics are dominated by insiders. And I feel like the same status quo mentality is just not getting it done, especially over the last decade on Beacon Hill. And so I'm running to be a fresh infusion of new leadership to fight for these big solutions that we need on transportation, on housing, on climate change, and really to use my economic expertise and my lived experience too, for that matter, to bring a fresh voice, because the same status quo mentality of doing just enough to get reelected, doing just enough to fly under the radar, is not working. Voter engagement is really low in Massachusetts. We have the least competitive elections in the country. Myron, I'm sure you know this, turnout is really low in local elections. It's low in primary elections. And part of that's because we have some of the longest serving state legislators who rarely face a competitive election. In Massachusetts, we have some of the highest rates of incumbents being unopposed, the lowest rates of incumbents, facing any general election challenger. So I feel like we need to revive democracy in some sense in Massachusetts, make it more competitive, push for bigger solutions. Yes, I believe we have local issues that I'm listening to. I'm meeting with leaders, voters across the district. So whether it's revitalizing downtown here in Stoughton, or addressing traffic in Mansfield, or property tax issues in Sharon, we have local solutions. We need to push for better local solutions. But at the State House, the scope of the work has become really shockingly small, and we need to reinvigorate it, and I hope to be that fresh perspective.
Very good, thank you. Now we have some issues that are worldwide, national, and they do trickle down to the local level. So we're going to ask, what do you think about climate change and what can we do to help it?
Great question. It's a critically important issue. So I'll tell you a story. Last summer, I was vacationing with my wife and our 2 kids at a beach on the Cape. And while our kids were playing in the sand one day, during the day, that night we went out, my mother-in-law watched the kids, and we went out to hear a talk by a scientist. And the scientist said, we've worked with NOAA and other scientific institutions, and we've predicted that very beach that morning my kids were playing in, by 2070 would be gone to coastal erosion, vanished. And that's when it really hit me and my wife, like, wow, our kids are going to be in their 50s. They're going to look at these family photos. They're going to see a beach that no longer exists. So what do we do about it? To me, climate change is an existential crisis. It really is, in the true meaning of that word. And there's an appalling lack of action from the State House, from Beacon Hill, on climate change. Now, in 2008, the State House passed the Global Warming Solutions Act, which was pioneering for its time, but they haven't really acted on climate since then. It's been 12 years. Now, the science is crystal clear. We're having more extreme weather events, more extreme precipitation, or extreme high temperature events here in Massachusetts. So climate change is not just an issue in Australia or in the California forest. It matters right here, right now in Massachusetts. So what do we do about it? I believe that there's a consensus between the governor, the Senate, and the House to have a goal by 2050 of net zero greenhouse gas emissions, net zero carbon emissions. And that's a great goal. And I think anything that's driven by consensus is great, and we should do it. But we can't be limited by consensus. So in addition to having this goal, it's toothless if we just have a goal and we don't enforce it. And currently the legislation being considered is just to have this goal, this lofty goal by 2050 of net zero, and then let the executive branch, the governor, implement it. The legislature is ceding all its authority to the executive branch to figure it out. So that worries me, even though I support the goal. I think to really have action on climate change, you need to have carbon pricing, which puts a price, it's just that. It puts a price, say, starting at $20 a carbon ton, and you raise a lot of revenue. Now, does that mean expenses trickle down to consumers and expenses are higher? Yes. But here's the thing. 70% of the revenue is rebated back to low and moderate income households, so that with carbon pricing, most people, especially the people who are most vulnerable, are made better off. And if you bike, or if you carpool, or if you take public transit, you're going to be even better off getting those rebate checks. But for the other 30% of that revenue you could raise from carbon pricing here in Massachusetts, you could invest that into a green infrastructure fund to improve roads or wastewater, stormwater management systems. You could really do a lot of concrete improvements, no pun intended, concrete improvements to our municipal systems to mitigate on the effects of climate change, whether it's rising sea levels, hotter summers, droughts, in Ames Pond, I mean, that's one example. You know, this is going to be really real for folks over the next few decades. So that's what I'm proposing is carbon pricing in addition to that net zero goal by 2050. And there's lots of other local tools as well that you can give town governments in terms of, and we can talk about this later in terms of energy efficiency options. And but that's the gist of it. Real action won't come until we have some form of carbon pricing here in Massachusetts.
Okay, it is a serious problem, and there's a lot of hurdles to go through to get it initiated.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now we'll talk about housing. What do you feel about housing here on the South Shore?
Well, I mentioned my friend Patrick earlier, the homeless veteran who lived in my driveway for 4 months, and it's real. It's not just Patrick. It's when I've knocked on hundreds of doors, by the way, in Sharon and Stoughton, just in the last 2 weeks, before this coronavirus really hit, and now I have to take a break from going door to door. People think I'm a little crazy now, knocking on their door. But I would talk to people in Stoughton or in Sharon, and property taxes or just the cost of housing, period, kept coming up over and over again. You would have real middle-class families, firefighters, teachers, people who grew up in the town, went to college, got a college degree, want to start their family in the town they grew up in, and completely priced out. So it's a multifaceted problem. You need targeted tax relief for seniors. And so there's one bill in the legislature that would provide local options for an additional exemption for senior citizens who make below a certain income. So they would be, in addition to the kind of drop in the bucket exemptions that exist now, I think we need to go further for seniors. That's number one. Number two, the broader housing market is frankly in a crisis in the greater Boston area because you have rising rents and skyrocketing housing prices. And like I said, these middle class families are being priced out of any starter home. And so where you start as an economist, I look at the numbers, I see that housing production has slumped the last few decades in the greater Boston area. We need to improve our housing production in the area. Now, I say as a Democrat, I come out and I'll say this, our Republican governor has a pretty good plan that I would support when it comes to his housing choices bill. What you need is more housing choices. So as seniors downsize and they want more options, they need something beyond a single family home that costs $600,000. I mean, that's what their home is maybe worth now, and they're trying to sell it, but there's few options to downsize. And even if their home, say it's a $300,000 ranch, and they bought it and paid for it decades ago, they want options to downsize. So having more housing options by increasing the supply, that's critical. That's what the governor wants to accomplish. And how do you do that? You need to have zoning reform. Now, this is kind of one of the most unsexy topics possible. People, their eyes glaze over when you talk about zoning. But we need to have zoning reform that allows town meetings and city councils to make zoning changes with a simple majority vote, not a supermajority 2/3 vote. That is just an obstructionist rule, and it's preventing real innovation when it comes to housing policy. So that's the biggest thing. And the governor's bill does that, and so that's why I support it. But then finally, the last thing I'll say is we need to do more with affordable housing. Now, people confuse affordable housing with public housing or Section 8. That's not what I'm talking about. Affordable housing in Boston is a family of four making $80,000. That's affordable housing. It's workforce housing. And we need inclusionary zoning. Now, inclusionary zoning is something I'm pushing for in my own town of Walpole. It just means that larger scale developments have some share of affordable housing. So that's what we need to do. It's a lot of work to do with housing, but inclusionary zoning, the governor's bill for housing choices, and property tax relief for seniors is where I would start.
Okay. Next is education, and this is an important aspect of the town's budget because probably 60-70% of a town's budget is for the schools.
Yes, it is the biggest expense for every city and town in Massachusetts. And recently there was a big bill passed at the legislature, the Student Opportunity Act. And it was a good bill, but I felt like we could do a lot better. And we can talk about that later. But when it comes to education, what really got me involved in politics, as I mentioned earlier, is full-day kindergarten and early childhood education. And if we're really going to address the widening disparities between the haves and have-nots when it comes to education. The fact that your education is really dictated by your zip code, if we're really going to address that, we need to start earlier, not just with full-day kindergarten, and fund that, by the way, not have it be an unfunded liability for town governments, but actually fund it from the state. But we're going to have to go further. We're going to have to pursue universal pre-K. And this, yes, it costs money, but this is one of the most amazing facts when I tell people. Universal pre-K pays for itself, and I mean that literally. There's no fuzzy math with that. Study after study shows that by investing in kids at 3 and 4, before they hit kindergarten, they're going to have higher earnings and pay more taxes. They're going to have better health outcomes. They're going to do less crime in a way that, on net, society benefits. And so I think that is not really a cost. It's penny wise, pound foolish to say, I don't know if we can afford universal pre-K because we can't afford not to do it. So that's my biggest issue when it comes to education. But we'll talk later about the Student Opportunity Act, I hope. But I support that bill. It's not going to do much for Stoughton, I'll be honest with you. It's not going to do much for the towns in this district. It's not going to be bad for them, for Sharon, for Walpole, for Mansfield. It's really targeted to help the poorest of the poor cities in those districts, like Lawrence and Fall River and Springfield. Those districts really benefit the most from the Student Opportunity Act. And I support that, but I think it could have been handled better. But yeah, education is the number one issue for local governments, and to really not pit seniors and taxpayers against kids at the local level, that's why we need that property tax reform I mentioned earlier. Providing targeted tax relief to seniors, that's going to help solve a lot of the burden, because right now there are plenty of, say, seniors in Stoughton or in Walpole who say, I'd love for the schools to be better, but another override or another school, and they feel that pinch. And so the real solution to education funding at the local level is property tax reform, I actually think.
Yeah, one of the things is they have Proposition 2.5 here in the state, and that's become an automatic increase. It's like, oh, we'll just raise the budget another 2.5%. So it really hurts the citizen. Okay, so now we're going to go on to current transportation issues in general, and what is your opinion on the South Coast Rail Project?
So I think transportation is the number one issue in this district, and I say that not just because when I go door to door people tell me that, but because the numbers tell me this. So of all 160 state rep districts in the Commonwealth, this district, the 8th Norfolk District, has the second highest average commute time to work at 38 minutes. And for some of the towns like Sharon, it's 40 minutes. So whether you're driving by car and stuck in the worst in the nation traffic, right? For the second year in a row, we have the worst gridlock. And last year it was rated 8th worst in the world, Boston. So either you're stuck on the highways in traffic, or you have public transit that's unreliable, that's expensive, that's not even safe. We've had 40 derailments in the last 5 years. Red line, green line are some recent examples. So transportation is the number one issue. What do we do about it? We need to reinvest in existing assets in a way that makes it affordable. Right now it's, $15 to $18 round trip to ride the commuter rail. We need to have progressive revenue from the Fair Share Amendment. That's the millionaire's tax. It's a 4% surtax on incomes above $1 million. It won't kick in for a few years, but I think that progressive revenue can help fund some improvements to existing infrastructure, because frankly, it's falling apart, and improve commuter rail service. Eventually, over the next 2 to 3 decades, if we're going to really combat climate change, we need to electrify our bus and rail system, because transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the state at over 40%. So that's the long-term goal with public transit. But let's be honest, we're a car is king culture. That's not going away anytime soon. Fixing the commuter rail, making it reliable and affordable, that's important. But cars aren't going away anytime soon. And so how do we fix the worst in the nation gridlock? Well, look at Boston compared to the other 10 biggest cities in the country. We're the only one of those top 10 biggest metro areas that doesn't have some kind of intraday toll changes, or what I would call congestion pricing. So this is like a toll discount if you drive at an off-peak hour, right? And there's ways to do this, by the way, that don't affect millionaires and people working minimum wage jobs equally, right? There's ways to do it that's means-based congestion pricing. So this is a proven method to reduce gridlock, and we just aren't exploring it. And this is what I keep coming back to. There's so much inertia in state government. There's so much unwillingness to take a proven method that works elsewhere and apply it in Boston, a reluctance to change. And so I think congestion pricing would solve a lot of our traffic issues. It's something that Transportation for Massachusetts, which is an umbrella group of various transportation organizations, including business groups, support this. So right now you have the state legislature raising the gas tax by 5 cents, or proposing to. Well, if we really want to fund transportation improvements, let's raise revenue in a progressive way. I think the millionaire's tax is a great starting point, but if we're going to fix transportation, it's going to start with congestion. And we need to take cars off the road or incentivize cars to go at off-peak hours, and congestion pricing is the best way to do that. Toll discounts, however we want to do it, we need to start that conversation, and I just don't see that happening at the State House.
One of the things that seem to pop out is lack of pre-planning. I know when the Southeast Expressway was completed, it was obsolete, and all the roads that are being built now are not looking into the future as far as capacity. I think the other thing that would really help the commute would be to put a rail line around the 128 loop so that all those business people and employees could take the train to work instead of sitting on Route 128.
You know, these are great ideas when it comes to our old model of a hub and spoke, right? There's no wheel. It's just lines out, Providence, Stoughton, Franklin, different lines that come through this district of commuter rail, and it's hard to connect them. It's hard to connect, and so you have all this traffic on Route 128 because not everyone lives in this community, works in Boston, and we got to get out of that mindset. So I like that as a solution. You asked me about South Coast Rail. I didn't answer about that because I'm so fixated on transportation being the number one issue in the district. So South Coast Rail, I've met with the Stoughton town manager. I've met with most people on the Board of Selectmen in Stoughton. And I've talked to hundreds of residents because I've been knocking doors. South Coast Rail, as it exists, would likely destroy downtown Stoughton. And at a minimum, we need to, as a state legislative delegation, we need to barter and plead and fight the state to mitigate South Coast Rail. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean rerouting? I know one local leader, Mark Tisdale, has talked and done work about the issues with wetlands and whether we could reroute the current plans of South Coast Rail. That's complicated. I don't know about that. But the existing plan with the 8 grade level crossings that would just tear up downtown Stoughton, and furthermore, is it a Trojan horse for freight? These are really serious issues. So like you just heard me talk about the importance of public transit. I'm a big believer in public transit, but I don't believe in public transit that's going to destroy the chance to revitalize downtown Stoughton. So that's my biggest concern, is that as your state representative, I would work to mitigate South Coast Rail, explore options like in Easton, where they have parallel tracks on 138. There are options to reroute this. So that's what you have to fight as a state rep. You can't just keep your head down and do as you're told that, hey, this is coming, we're going to ram this through your district. So that's my opinion of South Coast Rail, but more broadly, don't even get me started on the economic thinking behind it, because I'm just wondering about the logic of a worker in Fall River riding a train 90 minutes each way, and how many of those jobs are really going to connect. Again, I'm all for improving existing public transit, but I don't fully understand the genesis of this idea.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's well thought out. Okay, now we're going to talk about issues for Stoughton itself. And the first issue is downtown development.
Yes. Again, as I mentioned, I met with the town manager, several members of the Board of Selectmen. I'm not I'm not saying that they endorse me or anything. I just wanted to listen and learn and be the best informed candidate I can be. So when we talk about downtown economic revitalization in Stoughton, I go back to my hobby horse of zoning. Because as I understand it, the SHMOOD, or the overlay district, that in the last 10 to 15 years has created so many complications for businesses downtown, that has to change. So you have a really restrictive overlay district that prevents businesses in terms of the parking distances. It prevents them from really investing and revitalizing their business in downtown Stoughton. So how do we change that? This goes back to zoning reform and the governor's bill about housing choices. We need to have a simple majority vote at town meeting or at the city council level to change zoning. And in particular, for the SHMOOD, for this overlay district, to make the case, hey, that we can change this, we can make it less restrictive. But by doing so, you can then take advantage, have a cascade of business investment and then tax credits to encourage further redevelopment, whether it's the State Theater, whether it's the train depot. There are beautiful assets, I mean, really classical assets in downtown Stoughton with tons of character. Places you'd want to have restaurants and breweries and a really great public spaces. But to get there, we need to mitigate South Coast Rail so it doesn't just come right through. And second, we need to change the restrictive overlay district. So that's where it starts at a concrete level. The state for sure can help to provide matching grants, to do some of this redevelopment, to do some of this mitigation at the State Theater. So we got to keep fighting for that. But again, I'm not a Stoughton resident. I've just been talking to hundreds of Stoughton residents as I knock on their doors. I've been meeting with Stoughton leaders. And I want to continue to listen and learn because I don't have all the answers when it comes to downtown redevelopment and revitalizing it, but I will fight to make that a top priority.
One of the things I think they need to do is pour some money into the theater that's downtown and get that rolling. I've been to the Providence Performing Arts Center a few times, and it's really fantastic. The building is gorgeous. It's Art Deco from the 20s, and good site for the stage if you're in the audience, and they do some great shows there. And the restaurants are fantastic down there. One of the problems I see in Stoughton is the lack of downtown parking. I think that really hurts the town. I see businesses come in, 6-7 months, they're closing up because they're not drawing the people into the area. Okay, now we're going to talk about the public safety building that the town manager was here. And she was speaking that she would like to see one public safety building built because encompassing the police and the fire department and the town hall, because the building now that the police use looks great from the outside, but on the inside it has a lot of issues.
That's exactly what I've heard. And to start with where the need is greatest, I think Fire Station 1 is the real asset. I've heard people call it deplorable, but just its age and its restrictive space is not up to what the town needs. So the fire station is the top priority, but as you said, the police station, maybe from the outside, looks pretty good, 20, 30, 35 years, it's pretty recent. You think, okay, why do we need a new police station? But what I've heard from town leaders is when it comes to humidity, when it comes to the foundation and the space it was built on, it wasn't built with growth in mind. And so even though it was more recent, it is already hitting its limitations, both in terms of these humidity issues with the evidence room. I know that's a complicating factor, but also with just the structural place it was built on. So a combined public safety facility. You see this in Sharon. You see it in several communities nearby. It requires, let's be honest, another debt exclusion override to get this done. But if you think for the long term, what you want to avoid is being penny wise, pound foolish, right? I would never tell Stoughton you should have this combined public safety facility or not, because I'm not a Stoughton resident, I'm not a Stoughton taxpayer. But as a state representative representing half of Stoughton, here's what I can do. I can push for a fund to help provide matching grants for public safety facilities. So what we have right now, we have 1 penny of the sales tax goes to the MSBA for Massachusetts School Building Authority, and they partner with towns like the recent Stoughton High School, and they provide matching grants. Well, that's great, and it's a fantastic program, MSBA, but what about public safety facilities? This is something that the state legislature can get involved with. Have a program of matching grants. Maybe it's funded by a quarter or a half a cent from the state sales tax. It has some dedicated revenue source, right? And from that revenue source, you can assist local governments who are in this situation, who want to improve a deplorable fire station that's not up to par, but why not do a combined public safety facility? It's not that much more money. It kind of makes sense. But if it's all on the backs of taxpayers in terms of another override, it would be mitigated if you had some state funds. So that's my take on it.
The fire station also isn't, what's the word I'm looking for? Isn't safe because they don't have a hazmat office that if they need to get cleaned up and stuff like that. So they really need to work on a public safety building that encompasses all the modern needs of a town.
Absolutely.
Okay, now I know you talked a little bit about the Student Opportunity Act. That's Commonwealth funded $1.5 billion into school districts over 7 years, requiring more funds for school systems with higher percentages of low-income students and English language learners. It starts at 24% and increases as the needs of the schools.
So the Student Opportunity Act, I mentioned this earlier. How did it pass? It passed unanimously. Everybody voted for it. Unanimously in the House, unanimously in the Senate. The governor signed it. Now, that's great. Consensus is great. But if you only did things that were agreed upon by consensus, you wouldn't get anything done. So lo and behold, Massachusetts is the latest state in the nation to pass its budget for each of the last 2 years. So this mentality of let's do the lowest common denominator, something that we all agree to. Now, what's wrong with the Student Opportunity Act? On the face of it, nothing. I would have voted for it too. It's, like you said, $1.5 billion of allocated spending. But what did it do with the revenue? It didn't raise a nickel in revenue. So this all sounds great, right? That we're going to spend more on schools, and particularly the schools like in Lawrence and Springfield that need it most. That sounds great to me. But what happens when there's another recession? And inevitably there will be another recession. There's no dedicated source of revenue for this $1.5 billion. So that extra school spending is going to compete with the T. It's going to compete with all types of mass health, all types of needs. So to me, it's not financially prudent to pat ourselves on the back, pass $1.5 billion of new spending, say, oh, it's going to be phased in over the next 7 years, and we'll just get the money from somewhere. Even though I support the idea of it, I just feel like there's better ways to go about it. And also the transparency was really lacking in terms of how the debate on that bill came out because they didn't release the numbers. The legislature did not release the numbers on the district by district effects. The governor had to do it. And when the governor released at least, some preliminary numbers, you heard shouts and cries from the legislature of, those aren't accurate, that's not quite right. And it goes back to this fact that people aren't willing to take a tough vote. They're not willing to say to their district, hey, Sharon, Stoughton, Walpole, Mansfield, this is what I would say. We're going to get some money out of this. Is it a lot? No. Is it the right thing to do for the whole state? Yes, because Springfield and Lawrence and Fall River are struggling. That's just the facts, and here are the numbers to back it up. But they would rather just operate in the dark, not release the numbers, and just have a big ribbon-cutting ceremony where everyone voted unanimously for this because they didn't have to take a tough vote to raise a nickel in money to fund it. So that's my take on the Student Opportunity Act. It's a good piece of legislation, but it could have been a lot better.
Again, no foresight. Okay, now let's talk about the local tools for conservation and energy efficiency and some programs that the viewers can tie into.
Yeah, so I speak a big game about climate change and this big abstract, we need to have carbon pricing and all these. But really locally, you can have a lot of improvements. You could do a lot in terms of energy efficiency at the local level. So two things come to mind. One is a local stretch zero code, an ability for local governments, town meetings, city councils, if they want to opt into a more aggressive energy efficiency building code for their buildings. that, to me, is a no-brainer. You should give local governments the option to do that. Right now, you have to get permission, hat in hand, come to the legislature to get anything through. Right now, you should just give permission to the cities and towns to do what they want with a local net zero stretch code if they choose to vote it in. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. The other local option in terms of energy efficiency, or it's not even in terms of energy efficiency, but in terms of climate change at the local level, and this is real, and this is radical in a good way. It's radical in a good way. A local option for divestment. So pension systems are often at the local, but mostly county level. You have pension systems, and there's an inherent hypocrisy where these local governments are saying, hey, we want to fight climate change, we want to reduce carbon emissions, we want to have LED certified school buildings or municipal buildings. But at the same time, we have all these pension assets of retirees, and we're investing them into fossil fuel companies. Okay, well, here's what I'm suggesting, and this is a live debate. Have a local option for pension systems to divest, if they choose, if voters want to. No one's forcing this on anyone. But if voters want to divest their pension system assets from fossil fuel companies, they should have the right to. That makes sense to me, because if you find it inherently contradictory that you're supporting, carbon emissions reductions while at the same time investing in ExxonMobil, you should have the option as a pension system to divest. So again, it's going back to local control. And unfortunately, in Massachusetts, we have this, I don't want to say it's a myth, but this home rule mentality where on the surface it seems like local governments have a lot of control, but they don't. They don't. They have to keep going to the legislature to get anything significant done, whether it's property tax exemptions, whether it's these local stretch net zero codes, whether it's the divestment issues for the pensions. And the legislature is taking up a lot of its time dealing with almost trivial issues that they should let the local governments have their power over, have that autonomy. So that's my take on local efforts for conservation and energy efficiency.
Okay. Now, how are you going to increase if you're elected, increase transparency at the State House?
So this is the issue in this election, the issue. So when you talk to voters on the doors or at the train station, they want improvements in transportation or housing or education. My argument is you can't get any of that done until you change you fix the State House. You can't fix the environment until you fix the State House. You can't fix housing until you fix the State House. What do I mean by fix the State House? We have one of the least transparent governments in the country. We're the only state out of 50 states where the governor, the Senate, and the House are all exempt from public records request. We have, unlike most states, a secretive committee voting process where you can't see how your state rep voted. They don't publish roll call votes at the committee level, or it's inconsistent of how they publish them, so that bills routinely die, they get killed in votes, that we can't know how our rep voted. I don't think that's right. If I'm your state rep, I want you to know how I vote on everything, not just at the roll call level of the whole legislature, but at the committee level. That's where the real action's at. And so I've signed the Voters Deserve to Know pledge, which is a pledge to make all committee votes and committee hearings public, and to work towards improving our abysmal public records laws. So let me just tell you a story. This will drive it home. So last January, in January of 2019, there was a vote on the House floor, and the way it works is there's a big scoreboard with your name and a green and red light. And so there was a vote, and the speaker's vote, he's the leader of the House, he votes red, and you see people votes come in, it's 3 minutes to vote. Well, before the time's up, the speaker changes, it was incorrect. He meant to vote green, so he changes it red to green. You see 63 Democrats change their votes, like drones, like robots. They just change their votes from red to green. And that kind of follow the leader mentality of not really voting to represent your district, but voting to follow the speaker has to change. And the way it can change to lessen the concentration of power is to have these transparency reforms, to publish the committee roll call votes so that there's more of a back and forth debate in the legislature on the House floor. Right now, there's just not enough debate. So much of it gets done in secret at the committee level, and you would really open up the process, really democratize the State House if you had those debates happen in the open. So that's what I would push for. I'm the only candidate in this race that has signed and supports the voters deserve to know pledge, and I stand by that. That is the key to having any true progress when it comes to transportation or education or any of these other issues. We have to fix the State House first.
That sounds like a great plan. We're going to take a little break here and let the station do its public service broadcasts right now.
Hi, this is Roy Cohen. The crew would like to thank Maxie's Delicatessen, located at 117 Sharon Street in Stoughton. You can reach them by calling 781-341-1662. The American Cancer Society is looking for volunteers to drive cancer patients to and from treatments. You can volunteer by calling 1-800-ACS-6662 or online at www.cancer.org. Ilsa Mock's Food Pantry and St. Anthony's Free Market is located at 2 Park Avenue in Stoughton. For more information, call Christine Gallagher at 781-341-0611 or 781-341-0549. To get involved with Meals on Wheels, call Jessica at 781-344-8882, extension 2. The Stoughton Penny Saver. Our business is advertising your business in Stoughton. To advertise, call 781-344-4833. Community Forum showtimes here in Stoughton. You can see it on Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays at 6 p.m., Monday at 8 p.m., Tuesday at 5 p.m., either on Comcast Channel 9 or Verizon Channel 28. If you have any comments or suggestions, contact us at communityforum1@yahoo.com. Samaritans, 41 West Street, 4th floor in Boston, Massachusetts, 02111, or call them at 617-536-2460. The 24-hour helplines, 877-870-HOPE or 877-870-4673. Samaritans, 800-252-TEEN or 800-252-8336, or online www.samaritans.hope.org. For you bingo players, I want to tell you about the Monday night bingo being held at the Ahava Torah Congregation, 1179 Central Street in Stoughton. The doors open at 4:30 p.m. The games start at 6:30 p.m. You come on down and win some money. They have 2 big prizes. One is $1,199 and the other one is up to $3,000. So come on down.
Okay, Andrew Flowers, State Representative Candidate, 8th Norfolk District, encompassing Sharon, Stoughton, Walpole, Mansfield. The email address is andrew@andrewflowers.com. The website for the campaign is www.andrewflowers.com. And you can reach the campaign at 781-724-2427. Okay, Andrew, we've covered quite a bit here. There's a couple questions left for us to discuss. Why should voters choose you over other candidates?
Voters should choose me over other candidates because of 2 things. One, my experience, my lived experience and my professional experience. But secondly, when it comes to political courage, that's what we really need right now. So to take a step back, as I said at the start, we have major challenges to face in Massachusetts. A transportation system that's failing us, inequality that's getting worse. We have the perils of climate change. I mentioned this, that are real. They're real, not just in Australia or in California, but they're real here. And what are we going to do about it? There are lots of good ideas out there. I don't pretend to have all the right answers. I don't. And I will listen and learn for the local solutions all the way up to the state level solutions. I will listen to voters. But to get anything done, we need people with the right experience to craft that legislation, and we need people who have the political courage to see it through. So let me say a little bit about my experience. It's my lived experience, going through a family that struggled and knowing what it's like to go bankrupt. I saw my dad have a surgery that wasn't covered by a health insurance company, and it bankrupted our family for the first time. And they went bankrupt later. We went bankrupt later too. But I lived through that. I worked as a janitor. I drove a little 88 Mitsubishi truck to high school. And often in the back of my truck, I would have a vacuum cleaner and cleaning supplies because I would clean a Methodist church that morning, or I would clean an office building or a T-Mobile store that morning. I would clean these clients of my dad's janitorial business, and then I'd go to school. So I know what it's like to grow up and struggle, and then my professional experience reflects that, because as an economist, I saw inequality get worse over the last 15, 20 years in America. I saw a financial crisis at the front lines on the Fed, and I've had some real world experience, because that's what it comes down to. Why you should vote for me versus anyone else in this race is that I have real world experience. I've worked for a tech company, I've worked for the private sector, and I've worked for the public sector through the Fed. So I have the real world experience, I have the economic expertise to combine with my lived experience to really deliver for solutions, practical, progressive solutions for the people of this district. That's the first reason. My experience is why you should vote for me. But the second, vis-a-vis any opponents in this race, is political courage. Like I said, there's a lot of great solutions out there to fix transportation or housing or education, but the State House is not up to the urgency of the time. The legislature is not matching the moment we have to seize in terms of transportation or climate change. The State House insiders just aren't getting it done. And so when it comes to fixing the structure, the full structural reform that we need to get things through, that's where transparency comes in. And I'm the only candidate in this race who signed the Voters Deserve to Know pledge. You deserve to know how I vote on every vote at the committee level. And I'm going to represent you, not the State House leaders that am I afraid I'm going to get an office in the basement? Yeah, I don't care. Am I afraid that I'm going to go against the wishes of some higher up in leadership? Big deal. That doesn't matter. If we continue to have this keep your head down mentality, vote as the leadership tells you to, we're not going to get anywhere. And so we need reform, we need transparency, and yes, I'm a Democrat, and yes, I have practical progressive solutions, but more than anything in this race, I have an urge to see transparency and reform, and that's the difference.
Okay, we've covered quite a bit, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to speak on some issues that we may not have spoken about.
Yeah, so we discussed a lot the importance of transparency and openness in the state legislature, the importance of real action on transportation, housing, education, climate change. We spoke a lot about local issues, and I really believe ultimately that we can do better. We can do better. Throughout Massachusetts history, you see Massachusetts residents and voters look at themselves and say, you know what, we can do better. When education was lacking, Massachusetts became the birthplace of public education. When LGBTQ rights were lacking, Massachusetts led on equality. When healthcare was lacking, Romney Care passed. Massachusetts led on healthcare. So over and over again, Massachusetts voters looked at themselves and said, okay, we can do better. And that's what I'm asking for the residents of the 8th District to say. You live in Stoughton, in precincts 2, 3, 4, 6. If you live in Walpole, precincts 3 and 4. If you live in Mansfield, precinct 4. And if you live in Sharon, all of Sharon. Are you satisfied that this is the best we can do at the State House? And I don't think you are. I think you see that we have the worst in the nation traffic. You see that we have climate change, which is real. It's affecting our coast. It's affecting our summers. But we haven't really acted on it in 12 years. You see a State House that has the same representatives for 10, 20, 30 years, that has the least competitive elections in the country. And I think you say, hey, we can do better. And that's ultimately what this race is about. I'm not so naive to think that I alone am going to change it. But there is a movement afoot of reformers. Over a dozen state reps have signed that Voters Deserve to Know pledge. Over a dozen state reps are willing to go out on a limb and say, we need better transparency, we need better reform, because that's the key to getting any of this done. And ultimately, at the district level, I know that we can do better. We can do better when it comes to seniors paying high property taxes in Sharon. We can do better when it comes to revitalizing downtown here in Stoughton, or mitigating South Coast Rail, or fully funding the schools in Walpole and Stoughton from the Student Opportunity Act. And in Mansfield, I believe we can do better when it comes to traffic and having responsible development. So case after case after case, I meet with district leaders, I meet with voters. I think we can do a lot better, but ultimately it comes from the voters. And we have really low turnout in state primary elections. So this election is Tuesday, September 1st. And sure enough, the state legislature did not allow for early voting, or hasn't allowed for early voting yet. Why? Because they're not really keen, in my view, they're not keen on having high turnout. There's a reason why 10 to 12 to 15% is the average turnout in a state primary, because it benefits incumbents. The lower people turn out, the more protection incumbents get. So we need high turnout this year, and we have a special case with a competitive U.S. Senate election between Joe Kennedy III and Ed Markey, and we have a special case of a competitive congressional race in the 4th Congressional District. So we have reason to get higher voter turnout on September 1st. But I want to add to that. I want this little state rep race, which most people, they don't always know who their state rep or state senator is, but I want to raise engagement. I want to knock on thousands of doors. I want to listen to thousands of voters and say, okay, we can do better. We can do better, and it starts with the transparency. It starts with openness at the State House. And with that reform, with those reforms, we can start to have a domino effect. And we can reinvest in public transit. We can fix local issues. We can even do something so grand as have Massachusetts be a nationwide leader in climate change again. And so I believe that we can do better. And that's why I hope you vote for me.
Okay. Andrew, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for coming into our station and showing your views and discussing all the issues of why people should vote for you. And at this time, I would like to thank the staff and volunteers here at SMAC for making all this possible for you, the viewer.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.